Good afternoon, and welcome to this Juniper Research interview with Experian. We're here today. We're speaking to Steve Yin, who is Senior Vice President for Product Management for Experian's Global ID and Fraud Business Group. Hi, Steve.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon.
So we're here today to really speak about a really interesting topic and the CrossCore product and what we're seeing in fraud detection and prevention. So some really interesting areas here. And this is all off the back of some recent award wins for Experian in our Future Digital Awards program. So firstly, congratulations to Experian on those award winnings, very richly deserved. And secondly, let's just start by looking at sort of the broad landscape of fraud. What are the sort of major trends you're seeing really hitting right now in the space?
Yeah, so thanks for having us. I appreciate the opportunity to get together. Trends in fraud, obviously fraud's always changing. The biggest trends that I guess it's not really even a trend anymore, right, is the migration, more aggressive migration online due to the pandemic and all of the issues that brought. Certainly there's an increase in traffic for sure. Increase in traffic across commerce, across opening of financial instruments, et cetera. But also an increase in traffic in folks that probably would be surprisingly a little more novice in their online experience. So perhaps susceptible more so than others to fraudulent activity. So that's clearly a situation. And at least in the U.S., we've seen an increase or a continuation of the types of frauds that we saw with all the stimulus money that was being injected into the economy, right? So it wasn't just the fraudulent activity around the actual acquisition of stimulus money, but it was the incorporation of either manufactured or stolen identities as landing spots for the laundering of that money that was ultimately received. So we've unfortunately seen a sizable uptick in kind of, I'll say, the flow associated with all the additional money that was coming in, as well as the novice kind of online users that may have not have already seen the types of frauds and scams that are prevalent.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think from our point of view, we would completely agree. We're seeing this massive increase in sort of digital traffic, and I think you're really right there to highlight sort of the novice e-commerce user, and that has been sort of a key element we've seen. Also in terms of sort of merchants that are new to the e-commerce landscape or expanding into different areas. So I think there's a lot to unpack there and a lot to consider there around how you actually make it easier and less risky for that new behavior to be occurring.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Responsibility exists across the ecosystem for being, more mature. It's certainly you don't want to suggest that new to commerce consumers should somehow immediately be ramped and sophisticated. But Experian does do a fair amount of just consumer education, right? Getting yourself educated in the types of frauds that can occur. We target that education to areas that we know are either hot for fraud or are frequented by those that might not be as educated in terms of the types of frauds that can occur.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sort of moving on to our next question, and I think sort of closely related to what we were talking about there, in terms of sort of looking at the fraud detection and prevention landscape and some of the strategies and capabilities you have in terms of that. What has really changed from the detection and prevention point of view in terms of this post-pandemic landscape? What is it you're having to do now on your side to really cope with these surges we've seen?
Yeah, so I mean, if we get beyond performance and the like, right, all the classic tuning and increased capacity and all that, that's kind of the table stakes of the game. I think what we're looking at is being much more, I suppose, predictive sensing of new signals that might be
Mhm.
being created out in kind of the fraud space. And so rather than, kind of or in addition to kind of the concept of having rules and models to address, let's say, known frauds that are coming in and known types of attack vectors, we've focused quite a bit on developing our sensing capabilities for the emergence of new fraud clusters, fraud types, et
Yeah.
cetera. So there's been a fair amount of work that we've been doing there to kind of get more predictive, alert alert our clients that perhaps there's an emerging threat over in the corner somewhere of the web, and
Yep.
and then take action predicated on that, or at least kind of get the heads up that there might be a new signal coming through.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I think, what would be interesting for sort of me and the audience here would really be to understand at a bit sort of deeper level, actually what the capabilities of CrossCore are and how that really translates into
Sure.
this really effective fraud prevention. What would you say to that?
Yeah, so CrossCore at its very base, right, is an orchestration platform that enables our clients to access various types of functionality, capabilities across kind of the fraud tools landscape, right? So if it's
Mhm.
incorporation of email information or incorporation of other digital identity types
Yep.
of identifiers, or perhaps even offline PII, classic PII identifiers, being able to orchestrate all the capabilities seamlessly in a real time, measured in milliseconds types of response, so that at the opening of a financial account, or once you've already got a financial account and you're visiting that website, monitoring and ensuring that your travel through that space is safe and secure. That's really what CrossCore is about, is orchestrating all of those capabilities and doing it in real time, so that ideally what you experience as a consumer is a very seamless,
Mhm.
hopefully relatively low friction free type of an event. And some of the things that we're doing, also just reflecting back on your prior question about CrossCore and the capabilities,
Mhm.
orchestration being at the forefront, or the core capability. um, we have focused quite a bit of our efforts in enabling ML, but not from the uh, classical sense of a new ML model, right, to
Mhm.
address a fraud or an identity situation. But we're taking it a step deeper and are creating what we would call smart orchestration capabilities within CrossCore. And that is an ML based capability that in real time makes the decision about what the appropriate assortment of capabilities are that should be brought to bear for that individual transaction that is coming through. So
Mhm.
identifying, understanding what that transaction is, and then going through a series of computations to ensure that the appropriate, I'll call it the cascade, right, of
Mhm.
capabilities is deployed. And in a relatively less risky situation, then efficiency and speed will be the key. But if we identify that a given activity is more risky, then we'll go through a series of computations to put forth the right assortment of capabilities, and that can be optimized actually across whatever the client desires the optimization to be. So it could be
Mhm.
optimized for catch rates on fraud, or it could be optimized for ROI, as another example, or perhaps it can be optimized for some kind of balance between friction and
Mhm.
catch rate and fraud identification. So it's a new way that we're looking at deploying ML within the CrossCore platform.
Yeah. That's interesting to me, and then I think there's a particular element here looking at the future of the fraud market, which is really important. And you mentioned sort of looking at new different metrics, different elements of the data as sort of circumstances change, and then scoring those, but with your ML engine. Now, for me, that's really interesting because we're seeing an increased amount of sort of alignment between digital identity and fraud, and we're also seeing a lot of partnerships in terms of getting so much more data, so many more identifiers, so many different elements into
Mhm.
this sort of fraud detection
Yeah.
pot. I guess in terms of then managing future fraud and really performing the best you can for merchants, for banks, for all these different stakeholders is about figuring out those different indicators and how to use them in different fraud
Yeah.
strategies.
Yeah.
Is that an accurate assessment?
It is, and what you're touching on are two things that we also see occurring within the space. I'll start with the convergence of what you already mentioned, right? Identity and fraud. So identity verification oftentimes is viewed as a discrete activity. We'll
Yep.
verify the identity of the individual, then perhaps we'll go through a fraud routine, and then in the case of a financial institution, they'll go through a crediting type of a process.
Yep.
And what we are seeing, certainly for our largest clients, is a convergence of two areas. The first is identity verification plus fraud, right? So seeing
Mhm.
that as a continuum, as a combined decision point is clearly happening. But then also, at least from the seat that we're in, because of course we're a credit bureau, in addition to
Mhm.
having a strong fraud and identity capability, is the convergence of the combined risk decision, right? So it's
Yep.
the overall risk decision associated with credit risk, associated with fraud and identity risk, and putting that kind of in a dashboard, in a singular experience for the client, is something that certainly we're moving toward, and we're in a fairly unique position to do that, given our business lines. So that's one area, right, that we see changing. I think the other is a directional or a conceptual or attitudinal approach that
Mhm.
we're viewing in the industry, and that is, we're looking at the entire end-to-end process of early signal sensing and discovery through remediation via creation of new models or enhanced models, through
Mhm.
deployment of those models, and then back to of course the fraud feedback. Our view on that is as that we need to accelerate that cycle to the best
Yep.
of our abilities, right? Because fraudsters are they're smart people, and they're crafty and they're quick, and so we need to be faster and smarter and better, and enabling as much as possible in that cycle from an automation perspective will give us over time a speed advantage, especially in that early fraud signal discovery area. The quicker we can highlight those types of things to our clients and have that full circle kind of looped through.
Mhm.
I think that's a perspective that, again, conceptually it all makes sense, but in execution is really where the key of it is, and that's definitely an area that we're focused on.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that sort of concept versus execution, and I think that is really where it's going to be sort of difficult in terms of making that happen, in terms of sort of combining some of these siloed processes at various different entities. But considering the amount of data and the perspective that Experian has with that credit bureau side, with that fraud risk side, if anyone can do it.
Yeah.
Then it's likely to be Experian.
Yeah. And if you also take a look and see the other digital assets that we've got, we do have a marketing targeting business, and of course
Yeah.
there's regulatory silos and data silos that are associated with it. But being in the stream of tons of digital data from marketing perspective gives us another ability to triangulate information from a digital footprint perspective. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of fraud detection and prevention capabilities, at the very core is data.
Yeah.
And you know, technology super important, but without the data, I think you're at square zero, so to speak.
That makes sense. I think, we've covered a lot of ground here, and I think it's been a hugely interesting discussion. Just really sort of to finish on, I'm going to ask you to get your crystal ball out in terms of where this market is going. And this is always an interesting one because you get so many different perspectives when you ask this question. But really, for you, and we've probably touched upon it quite heavily in talking about the increased alignment between identity and fraud and some of those aspects. But where do you feel that, say, in 5 years' time, we will be with some of these fraud elements? What new elements are we going to see? And what are vendors like Experian going to have to do about that? What are the big changes going to be?
Yeah, so the big changes, this has been on the forefront for a while, right? Everybody's been expecting things like virtual and augmented reality to start
Yeah.
having an impact. Deep fakes, they've been, again, theoretical for so long and demonstrated in academia, and then starting to be popularized. Certainly that's an area that we're going to have to be able to dig into. I think commerce. Commerce through things like addressable TV and the
Yeah.
like, right? These are all areas that all make sense. All the big players, from a content perspective, are rushing into it. But with every new piece of technology comes new opportunities to exploit. Unfortunately, from a fraud perspective, so part of our job is to stay on top of whatever digital trends are occurring. Maybe they're not already in our space and something to be acutely in tune with, but
Mhm.
a year goes by quick, and we need to be on top of all the types of digital trends that are happening, not just the ones that we have historically experienced. So I think those are some of the big areas. Of course, ML and AI will bring on even greater importance. I think explainability
Yeah.
within those spaces critical. We focus a lot of attention in those areas, both on the fraud side, but as well as on the credit side,
Yeah.
where it's just obviously regulated industries, and
Mhm.
be able to explain to anybody, here's how this algorithm, the mystical algorithm, was able to come up with the decision that it's making, is super important. And frankly, that takes a fair amount of time compared to
Yeah.
just establishing the ML model. It's establishing the capabilities around being able to explain the model is another core function that I think we as an industry are going to have to get even better at, as fraud sophistication increases.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And we could talk all day about these subjects, but we're going to have to end it there. But it's been amazing speaking to you today, Steve. Thanks so much for your insight. And that's it for this interview. But please check out our website for further information about the Future Digital Awards and about Experian's recent wins in this area. And we hope that you'll be watching a video soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.